Hello, welcome back to my channel, and welcome to my May 2024 wrap-up. I've read quite a few books in the month of May, which I find to be particularly exciting. Last month, April, was obviously a pretty hard month for me, and I only read, I want to say, like 5 or 6 books. This month I've read 24, so I feel like I'm back on track. I feel like I am mayhaps going to hit my reading challenge of 300 books this year. I'm still a little ways off, I'm still technically behind my schedule, but I'm gonna get there. I'm gonna catch up. Also, I had, I think, 4 5-star reads, which, okay, maybe proportionally doesn't sound like a lot when you read 24 books in a month, but to me that's an accomplishment. And I just had like a fun reading month in general with quite a variety of genres. We've got thrillers, we've got romance, we've got some literary fiction, so buckle up, strap in. I'm going to talk to you about all of the books that I read this month. First up, we have The Fury by Alex Michaelides. I didn't like this book. I thought it was shit. I really don't like, and I want to say The Silent Patient might have just been a fluke, and if I reread it, I probably wouldn't like it a second time around. This book is about a few different people. I guess the star of the show is this star of the show lady. She is a like renowned actress. She is kind of going through a little bit of a hard time, and she decides to go on this vacation with a whole bunch of her friends and this guy who's like kind of wormed himself into her life. A lot of the story is kind of narrated by this guy. To say things are confusing and to say that there is no real grippingness to this thriller would be an understatement, because the majority of this book is spent with our main character basically just like being in love with the actress, her not reciprocating those feelings and instead like hooking up with a guy who's like not very good for her. You never really know when the book's ending. Like, there's too many plot twists. I'm not going to spoil them because this is in fact a thriller, but let's just say this was not thrilling, and I give it 2 stars. Moving on to a book that I have more to say about because I actually did really enjoy it. To Wait When to Wed by Martha Waters is a historical romance about these 2 main characters, West and Sophie. I want to say it's the last book in the series by Martha Waters. I've read every fucking book in the series, haven't liked a single one except for this one, so I guess bully for me for sticking through. They pretty much always end up on some sort of list for one of the list videos I'm doing, which is why I've read so many of these books without having actually enjoyed any books by this author before. To Woo and to Wed was a really fun second chance romance. West and Sophie were friends back when they were in their young 20s. They were going to get engaged. Unfortunately, West's dad just really doesn't see Sophie as a really good contender for marriage. She is wealthy, her family is wealthy, but they are new money as opposed to West's family, who is like titled and like very old money. West's dad basically threatens him, hey, I know that you've had a shitty upbringing and I'm not the best dad, and I know that you only love this one country home, but I'm gonna sell that country home if you marry this woman. He is willing to do that. Sophie is not willing to let that happen, so she takes matters into her own hands and marries someone else, someone who is also in love with someone else who he can't be with. And so Sophie has this kind of like bland marriage to this guy who she's like not very in love with. He passes away pretty early on into their marriage, and now she can get with West. I mean, it makes it sound like this is like an easy romance, easy second chance. It's very much not. West obviously feels betrayed by the fact that Sophie did this to him. I don't think he knows all the details about why Sophie married someone else. He's actually very confused about it. I don't think he understands that Sophie was like kind of threatened actually by West's dad. It's complicated, it's complex. Wes's feelings though for Sophie are what really make this story so unique and so special, I think. There's a lot of good flashback scenes where you get to see both characters' emotions and their feelings towards each other, but in addition to that, you really get to see again Wes's like patheticness, for lack of a better word. He's kind of a pitiful little man, and I love it. He is obsessed with Sophie. He, you find out as the story carries on, has not been a rake during this time period. He's been literally pining for this woman who marries someone else. It's just so angsty and tension filled, and when they finally get together, it is perfect. Also, there's like times when he wants to, I guess, like fuck Sophie. She's down for it, but she's like, hey, I don't really want to get married myself. And he's like, I would never like sully you like that though. I want to marry you, and not only do I not want to sully you, I am so in love with you that the thought of just sleeping with you is not enough for me. I have to be married to you. Oh, I love a man. I love a man like that. Give me more of them. The Bridgerton men, rakes, scoundrels. West, not those things. And I really think if you are a Bridgerton fan and you're looking for a historical romance that's got some heroes that are different and sweet and tender, mayhaps you should read this one. It's quite good. I think I give this one 4 stars. I really enjoyed it. Next up, we have a reverse harem romance. If you are new here or new to the genre of romance, a reverse harem is when a woman gets with multiple men. Typically, those men do not get with each other in a sexual sense. It's not a polyamorous relationship necessarily, but woman has so many men falling all over her, and apparently this is something that a lot of women enjoy. I'm not a huge fan of the reverse harem genre just because it feels a little, it's not even misandristic. I'm a bit of a misandrist myself. I don't like the dynamic. I'm gonna be honest, I don't like it. It feels a little weird and unbalanced. But this one I thought was pretty charming for what it is. This book's about our four main characters: Layla, Zach, Josh, and Luke. Layla is in her 20s. She owns a lingerie business, and she's awkward as hell. She wants a family, and she wants to get married. She wants someone to care deeply for her, but she's just too fucking awkward to actually have a successful chance at a romance. At the beginning of the book, you see her on a date with someone, and it's just a complete fail. So she asks her neighbors who live together and have a podcast together. This is the only acceptable podcast by three men. We've got Zach, who is a rugby player who has a partner who I believe died, and he is just kind of not looking for love at the moment. Josh, who has been obsessed with Layla kind of forever, and then Luke, who was Layla's teacher back in the day, which creates an interesting dynamic. All three of these guys basically run a relationship advice podcast and are very like open about their sexuality and whatever. Layla decides to go on their podcast as like a way to revitalize their viewership and get their viewership excited again. They're gonna help her like find a man, and in doing so, obviously they all start fucking. It's fine. I think for a reverse harem romance, I think this one did a fairly good job at giving each character a good amount of development and a good amount of character traits, because here's the deal. Often in a reverse harem romance, you've got a woman going on this like sense of discovery, this journey to find herself and to find multiple dicks, but you don't really have the heroes doing the same thing. They're kind of all carbon cutouts and archetypes and whatever. You've got like the bad boy, you've got the billionaire. Like, it's just not for me. It's not for me. I like deep characterization, and I will say Lily Gold does kind of accomplish that in this book. I think each character gets their own point of view, and so you start to understand how each person is going to find themselves in this relationship and how they are going to heal parts of themselves. I think that's kind of nice. That being said, this is not my favorite relationship dynamic. It probably never will be, and I didn't really like the sex scenes, frankly. I didn't find them very hot, which is normally not a problem I have in reverse harem romances. Normally they are. I just didn't really like the sex scene writing, and that's obviously a very personal thing, but I think if you're in the market for a reverse harem romance and you want something steamy with good character development, I would recommend this. I think I'd give it like 3 stars. A book that I feel so fucking neutral about would be Redeemed by Lauren Asher. This book's about Santiago and Chloe. Chloe has gone her whole life not really knowing who her dad is. She knows a 23andMe. She finds out he's like this Italian fancy man, and so she decides she's gonna go to Italy and find him. What does she find instead? Love and dick. So Santiago is a F1 driver who injures himself and feels not only physically but also emotionally incapable of driving F1 again, and over the course of the story he ends up kind of healing his relationship with the sport and with himself, and Chloe helps him to do this because she might be sort of a wayward, quirky girl. She's got a heart of gold, and this heals Santiago and points out that he's been an asshole to people in his life, blah blah blah. In certain circumstances, I like a good healing romance. I like a good damaged hero who like is saved by the heroine, but as I age, I'm starting to realize I don't actually like that quite so much. At least again in the context of the heroine saving the hero. I'm totally fine with having either damaged hero or heroine, and by that I mean like has emotional stuff they need to heal throughout the book, but I don't necessarily like that Chloe was such a big part of Santiago's healing process. I also just felt like he was too grumpy for basically no reason at the beginning of the book. Like, I know he's going through a hard time, but it was just something that was fairly unpleasant to read about. So moving on, not exciting, 3 stars. Say You Swear by Megan Brandy. Oh boy, I DNF'd this, but I did just want to like touch on it briefly because I read this for a list video. Just what the fuck? I wanted a good love triangle romance, and again, it was for a list video, so I was like, okay, 2 birds, 1 stone. Something I like and something I have to do all at once. Sadly, it was not something that I liked. This book's about our 2 main characters, Chase and Ari, and apparently, ostensibly, there's a 3rd character who comes in to make it a love triangle, but I never met that person because I didn't get far enough in. Ari is the younger sister of this guy, I can't remember his name. Chase is the older brother's best friend. Duh. At the beginning of the story, all of the characters, and there's a fuckload of them, go to this beach before Ari's freshman year of college. She's going to attend the same college as her brother and her brother's best friend, and she thinks this is going to be the summer that she gets to hook up with Chase finally and show him that she is a real woman now. Chase is a bit of a bitch and like doesn't admit his feelings really for Ari, and he is too scared of what Ari's older brother will say, so he doesn't really try to go after her even though he's attracted to her. That's not what bothered me. Cowardly stuff was irritating. What really bothered me was the writing of this book and the best friend. So Ari has a best friend who is at the beach house, and she's constantly saying things like, girl, you gotta go do jumping jacks on the D. Like, unironically, it really kept taking me out of the story because really the story itself is not a bad one. The writing was just like pretty unbearable. I don't know what it is about authors who decide that they need to like really get in with like the slang and the lingo, but it pretty much never lands. And I also think that with a lot of slang and sort of like youth lingo, shall we say, it doesn't age very well. So if someone picks up your book in 5 years, there's a chance that whatever pop culture reference or slang you're using is going to be outdated and cringy. So just stick with the basics, you know? Have some people text. Texting's never going to go out of style. No. DNF. Let's move on to very different territory. We've been talking about a lot of romance. Educated by Tara Westover is a book that I read for another list video that's coming later in the year and is not a romance list, though. It's going to be interesting. It's going to be different, and I'm excited about it. Educated was a book that I heard a lot about. I heard it was about this sheltered Mormon girl becoming educated about the world. I don't know what I expected, but it certainly wasn't this. For some reason, I thought it was going to be very like FLDS. This girl's on a compound and she doesn't have any like traditional knowledge, any traditional schooling. It's about her like learning to read and write, eventually get a college education. I thought it was going to be that. It wasn't. And like, had I read the synopsis of the book, I would have known that what I thought the book was about, it wouldn't be about. There was so much time spent in this book on domestic abuse. So let me try to break it down for you while these birds loudly chirp overhead. Tara is living in a Mormon household, but her parents are kind of like survivalists. They're not fundamentalists. She can wear like normal clothes, I guess to an extent. She does have to like cover herself and be modest, but she lives a fairly normal-ish, weird, but like normal-ish life. She doesn't have any traditional schooling. She gets homeschooled by her parents, and over the course of the story, Tara does find education. She never ends up going to like a formal K through 12, but she does end up getting into BYU after taking her SAT. She also goes on to like Oxford and gets a PhD and all these different things. But throughout the story, there's just a heavy emphasis on family, Tara's relationship with her brother, and how that relationship sort of impacted all of her other ones. So Tara's older brother is very judgmental of the things that Tara does. He is like very physically and verbally abusive towards her, and everybody kind of turns a blind eye to her brother's behavior. Tara also points out that her brother had a couple of injuries that she thinks might have maybe damaged parts of his brain and made him the way that he is, but he is just relentlessly abusive, and that kind of comes up so much throughout the story. And I'm not saying that you shouldn't focus on your family and your upbringing when you're telling a story about your education, but I mean, this is kind of the memoir of this woman's life, right? Like, I'm not here to judge her and tell her what she can and can't write about, but I just feel like I wish there had been a little bit more emphasis on her overcoming things, her schooling, because those parts of the book were really interesting. I think I would have preferred a little less on-page depiction of the abuse personally. And again, it's like, I don't want to sugarcoat those things, or I don't think an author should have to sugarcoat those things if it's your reality and you feel like sharing that, but it just wasn't for me necessarily. Moving on to How to End a Love Story by Yulene Kwong. I have such mixed feelings about this book as well. Okay, this one's about our two main characters, Helen and Grant. Helen, at the beginning of the story, we're in the past. Her sister gets hit by a car and dies. Her and her sister had kind of a complex relationship, but obviously she's really devastated, and so are her parents at the death of her sister. Unfortunately, her sister was suicidal at the time. Her sister goes onto a highway to be hit by a car, and the person driving the car is the love interest, Grant. So that already sets this up to be kind of an uneasy read, in my opinion. Definitely kind of sets up an enemies to lovers thing, I guess. Far into the future, we have Helen, and she is a successful writer. She writes a series of like teen drama romances, and her books are going to be adapted for TV. She is helping write the scripts. Grant is one of the show writers. So Helen and Grant kind of like butt heads on how they think things should be developed, and over the course of the story, they kind of heal their relationship, not only in a professional setting, but also obviously in a personal setting, because Helen, while she doesn't really blame Grant for what happened, still has complicated feelings about her sister's death, and she works through those and gets through everything. I don't know, y'all. It was not a rom-com, certainly. It was not a lighthearted read, which is fine. It doesn't have to be that. It didn't promise to be that, but it just kind of tonally felt a little bit strange, especially considering how hot the sex scenes were. I'm not saying you can't be sad and sexy at the same time. Like, you can certainly be both of those things. I was just kind of taken aback, to be honest, by how the chemistry was written kind of just really blandly. I didn't really care about the interactions. It wasn't like witty banter going on. And then all of a sudden, this guy is just like masturbating to the thought of her. And like, it was kind of hot, but I was confused. This book is horny and confused. I think that's a really good way to put it. Ultimately, feel like I want to read more from this author in the future because she does a really good job writing sex. And that's something that I think is kind of hard to pull off and I bitch about often. But I kind of wish that the relationship had more palpable chemistry, because you have this interesting setup. I just feel like the execution was just a little lacking in the actual conversations and dialogue between the two characters. So I think I give this one 3 stars. A book that I liked a little bit more was Wild Love by Elsie Silver. I read this for my Choose Your Own Adventure reading vlog. I'll leave a link in the description to all of the videos that I've done this month because I'm really proud of them. And you can get more in-depth thoughts and feelings obviously in those videos. So Wild Love is about Ford and Rosie. Ford is this billionaire guy who has like made his fortune basically creating a Spotify type app. Now he's ready to do something that is just for himself. So he is opening his own music recording studio in this town he visited when he was a kid. And in this town is his best friend's little sister, Rosie. Rosie has recently been fired from her, what she thought was a dream job, after she accused someone of sexually harassing her. I mean, this person did sexually harass her, but her company didn't like that and they fired her instead of the guy who perpetrated this abuse against her. So she's back in her hometown. She needs a job. She asks Ford for a job. He gives her a job. He also gives her the dick. That's a bit of a simplification, clearly. I'm also, can I say, under a bit of a time crunch because I'm going to take engagement pictures for some of my sister's friends after this. I also just feel like this book doesn't really need a lot of explanation. It is a like billionaire and brother best friend romance and also a single dad romance. Essentially, Ford donated sperm a long time ago, and the child that resulted, I guess, from that donation comes and finds him and is like, hey, my dad passed away recently. My mom is really depressed and she can't take care of me. She needs to get inpatient help. Can you take care of me while my mom's in inpatient help so I don't have to be in foster care? He agrees. So Cora kind of plays a little bit of a role in the story as well. I liked this book. I thought it was sweet. I thought it was a departure from Elsie's other books, and that this is not a cowboy small town feeling romance. I mean, it is set in a small town, but it just doesn't really, in my opinion, have much of that feel, except for like the bowling scenes between Ford and some of the guys he meets in town. I think this one just felt a little bit less deeply romantic than some of Elsie's other stories. The ones that really land for me with Elsie are the ones where the characters are really discovering things about themselves, are learning and growing together. And in this book, I feel like Ford tried to solve too many of Rosie's problems for her, and I really would have liked to see Rosie finding her path in life. She felt so confused at the beginning of the story, getting fired from her dream job, working for this guy now who she's like kind of into. I don't know, it just didn't feel enough like she was really doing things for herself and more so was focused on obtaining the D, you know? Which is fine, but I need a blend of both for a romance to really land, and I think Elsie does a really good job at doing that. The books of hers that I tend to enjoy tend to be the more emotional ones. So anyway, good book, but not my favorite, so 4 stars on that. My favorite book of the month and one of my favorite books of the year, Just for the Summer by Abby Jimenez. I don't know if I can talk about this book. I mean, I can, but I don't want to wax too poetic about it. I don't want to talk about it too long because I would be annoying if I did. This book is about our two main characters, Justin and Emma. Justin, at the start of the story, posts on Reddit about how he is a guy that helps people find the people that they're going to spend the rest of their lives with. He dates women, they dump him, they find the love of their life right after. He is that guy that like helps people figure out who they really love or what they're looking for in a partner, I guess. And we find out throughout the course of the story that's because he's a really, really good, nice person. He's also dealing with kind of a change in his life because he is now going to be in charge of raising his 3 younger siblings because his mom is going to prison for a white-collar crime. His dad has passed away. Then we have Emma, who is someone who has a lot of commitment issues. Her mom is one of the flightiest, flakiest characters I've ever read in a book, and essentially abandons our heroine multiple times throughout her life, and Emma ends up in foster care and ends up with 2 really incredible foster parents and a foster sister who in adulthood she does travel nursing with. So Emma basically lives out of a suitcase. She doesn't stay anywhere too long, and the only person she ever really confides in is her best friend, and the way that Justin and Emma meet basically is through Reddit. Emma sees this post and kind of relates to it personally. She messages Justin, they strike up this friendship, and eventually her travel nursing takes her to Minnesota, which is where Justin is. And what ensues in this book is what I consider to be pure romance. Justin woos Emma and he's instantly drawn to her before she even shows up to Minnesota, but he is so into her throughout the course of the story and goes out of his way to be a total gentleman. And Emma does a lot of work growing and healing throughout the course of the story. Her mom ends up showing up kind of midway through the story. Justin, of course, gets custody of his siblings kind of midway through the story, which complicates their relationship and their dynamic. I don't want to say too much about the story because I feel like I've talked about it a lot and I'm going to talk about it a lot this year. But if you want a story that is equal parts sexy and sweet and tender and romantic, you gotta pick it up. It is so good. And I will say the third act conflict of this book ripped my heart open and I felt was so realistic to the characters and their experiences, and it didn't feel like it came out of nowhere or was inappropriate. Just 10 out of 10. I mean, Abby Jimenez I think can do no wrong at this point. First 3 books might have not been for me, but every book since then has just been a 5-star, just amazing book. I'm ready for the next one, okay? I really am. I'm also ready to talk about another 5-star read that I had this month. It was a Sapphic book, which I am pleased to report. It was, I think, a perfect summer book as well. So Here We Go Again by Allison Cochran is a book about our 2 main characters, Logan and Rosemary, and their journey to take their dying former teacher, Joe, across the country so that he can basically die in his final resting place and the place that he just like really wants to be, which is in Maine. They're in Washington State. They're going to drive across the country to Maine. This does prove challenging though, unfortunately, because Rosemary and Logan, while they were friends for a time in middle school, had a pretty bad friendship falling out and have been enemies ever since. Logan and Rosemary are both teachers. Logan, at the start of the story, we find out is just kind of like the total opposite of Rosemary. She's sort of a piece of shit. She hooks up with a lot of women. She She doesn't really care about being in a relationship or about, like, I guess growing up. She's living with her dad, which is not bad to live with your parents, I should say, for the record, but Logan, she has arrested development, shall we say. Rosemary, on the other hand, is very straight-laced, type A, and gets fired at the beginning of the story, or laid off, because there just isn't enough room in the budget to keep her on for the next school year, and she's feeling just shitty about herself and a little bit directionless. Logan and Rosemary do not want to go on this road trip together because they have very different, like, ideas of what this road trip should look like. They also don't really like each other. There's just misunderstandings between them, but they're going to come together for this teacher that they both personally really connected with and were able to confide in when they were both in high school, and Joe is dying of cancer. The story is just so beautiful. Romance is not the most developed romance I've ever read. I could have used more conversations and more healing of this sort of like second chance romance kind of situation between Logan and Rosemary. The way that grief is handled, the way that these two come together to take care of someone who meant so much to them, how Joe is able to help them come together, I thought it was just so charming. And I'm not normally a road trip story kind of person, but this is the perfect road trip story, and it just gives all the summer vibes personally. Like, I think that if you're looking for something just, again, charming and delightful, and you're someone who doesn't typically read romance, I think this would be a really great place to start, because it's not, I mean, it is a romance, but it's not so heavy on the romance that I think it would be irritating. The only thing that is irritating is that Logan, whenever she exclaims things, she always has to preface it by saying the name of, like, a prominent, not always a prominent lesbian, but, like, I don't know, she'll exclaim, "Chapel Roan, that shit's crazy," or "Haley Kiyoko, that's wild." I don't know why. I don't know why. I wish she would not do that, but she does. And so that's just something to be aware of. Another Sapphic book that I read this month was Late Bloomer by Maisie Eddings. I don't want to talk about this one too much because I found it boring, and also I gave it 2 stars. So this book's about our 2 main characters, Opal and Pepper. Opal is sort of a people pleaser, sort of a doormat, but at the beginning of the book, she ends up winning the lottery. It's not like a huge lottery, you know, she wins like $500,000, but this is enough to buy a flower farm where she is going to paint clogs. She wants to open her own business, and this is the perfect place to do that because she wants to, like, own her own home or whatever. What she doesn't realize when she ends up buying this place is that someone already lives there and is not aware that Opal is buying it. So Opal ends up buying this home from Pepper's mother after Pepper's grandmother passes away. And Pepper was really close with her grandmother, kind of hates her mom, creates an interesting dynamic where Pepper's upset that Opal is on this property and owns it now, but Pepper doesn't really want to move out. So they end up living together, falling in love, obviously. Opal kind of helps Pepper with the flower farm and getting it to be more profitable. I don't think Pepper actually helps Opal very much in exchange, but, you know, they fall in love or whatever. Now, there's certainly things that I appreciated about this book. There is autism representation, and I believe ADHD representation. I appreciated that. What I didn't appreciate was the way that this book was set up. It just didn't have any angst or tension or stakes, to be honest. The conflict in this book is very minimal, but the little, like, tiffs that the women get into are so immature and unfun to read about that I had a really hard time, like, connecting with the story. Overall, it just wasn't a story that I particularly gelled with, and it doesn't surprise me because I haven't had the best of luck with Maisie Eddings books, but this was just kind of a 2-star meh read for me. A book that was slightly better but still wasn't perfect was The Rule Book by Sarah Adams. This book is about Nora and Derek, and it is a second chance romance. I feel like I've been reading a lot of second chance romances lately. Let's just say that Sarah Adams books don't tend to stick the landing for me, I think, is the best way to distill what I didn't enjoy about this book. Nora is a sports agent, and she is going to become a primary sports agent where she can have her own clientele. Her boss assigns her Derek, who is a football player who is trying to come back from an injury and get more sponsorships, more opportunities, etc. The unfortunate thing is that Nora and Derek used to date in the past, and she kind of, like, ghosts him, kind of runs away from him, breaks up with him, and Derek's not super happy about this because he thought that their relationship in the past was true love, so he's having a hard time accepting Nora as his agent. But as time goes on, they kind of grow this begrudging friendship. They get married in Vegas after one wild night, and now they have to kind of spin this as if they meant to get married this entire time. They go on this honeymoon that is photographed by PR people, do a bunch of different stuff to, again, make this relationship look real, and it becomes real over the course of the story because they both love each other. Like, on paper, I don't hate that idea. In the beginning, I really liked it. Here's the thing, I always liked the Sarah Adams setups, and I always like that her heroes are surprisingly emotional and in touch with their feelings, but I feel like these books need a little bit better third act conflicts, and to be honest, I would prefer if they had sex in them. And I'm not saying that every book needs to have a sex scene. I'm not saying that. But I think some books are set up in a way in which I feel like they need more sex. And this was not a clean romance. There was a sex scene. It was not hot. It was like, we came together, our bodies joined. I don't even think they say penetrated. I was gonna use the word penetration. I probably should not just not say that word. Let's just not say that word. Honestly, if you just read this book and you had no idea what the context of some of the things that were happening in the sex scenes were, you wouldn't know they were sex scenes, you wouldn't know where he's putting certain things. It shouldn't bother me, but it does, and I just gave it 3 stars, okay? Moving on. A book that I loathed, a book that I'm also reading for a list video, Eleanor, Oliphant, is completely fine by Gail Honeyman, was awful. It was terrible. I hated every second of it. This book's been out since 2017, so I am going to spoil it for you, but this book is about a deeply emotionally damaged person who is trying to learn how to be an adult, essentially. She meets a guy at her work who she's not attracted to, who she's only friends with, which is nice. They end up like helping this old man who I think gets like hit by a car or something like that. I can't remember exactly the context. He's injured, they help him. And so she strikes up a friendship with both of these people kind of, and that kind of helps her grow a little bit, but not really, because basically what you find out is there's a twist ending in which the reason that Eleanor is the way that she is because her mom set a house fire that killed her little sister. So yeah, she has a lot of like phone conversations with her mother. Those phone conversations never actually happened. Here's the thing, it was not a pleasant read, and I'm not saying it was supposed to be, but it is peddled as a funny book. It's not funny. It's not funny to read about someone going through immense trauma, and it just wasn't, I was gonna say fun read. That's not what you're looking for in this circumstance, I don't think. It wasn't a very impactful read because of the way that it was written, and I don't really understand what the author's point was. Like, what was the point of the story? Was it supposed to be a story of hope? Because I didn't feel that. It's supposed to be a story of the human condition. I mean, maybe. I'm not doing this book justice. I don't think it needs to be done justice because people out there like it and find it to be this triumphant story. The only thing that was triumphant, to be honest, was when I was putting this book down. 1 star. The Graham Effect by Elle Kennedy. I don't really want to talk about this one again, to be honest. I read it for my vlog channel, so if you want to like see my full thoughts and feelings. Read this the same day that I watched Bridgerton season 3. But this book's about Gigi and Ryder. Gigi is the daughter of Garrett Graham, who is the hero in The Deal, which I don't know that I really like spin-offs with like kids, but it's fine. She ends up dating a hockey player. She is a hockey player herself. They kind of help each other in different ways. She helps him get a spot at the summer camp that her dad owns. He helps her with her hockey skills so she can get on the Olympic team, and they fuck. And that's pretty much it. It was just overly long. I didn't care for the side characters. I felt like this was kind of a retread of things that Elle Kennedy has already done with the whole like damaged hero. I don't know, 2 or 3 stars, it doesn't matter. Moving on. The book that I fucking hated, This Summer Will Be Different by Carly Fortune. And I find it ironic that this book is called This Summer Will Be Different because in theory this book is different than her other books and that there's not cheating involved, but it's actually not that different because I didn't like it. Just like I've never liked a single book by this author. This book's about Lucy and Felix and Bridget. Those are the 3 main players here. Felix and Bridget are siblings. Bridget and Lucy are best friends. Lucy fucks Felix. Lucy continues to fuck Felix every summer that she's invited to Bridget's family home for the summer in PEI. The story starts out basically with Bridget running away to her family home 2 weeks before her wedding that Lucy is going to be the florist for. Lucy is concerned. She calls Bridget. She's not getting an answer. Bridget eventually calls and is like, hey, I'm going through a hard time. Will you come? And of course, they're best friends, so Lucy shows up. Who else is on the island? Of course, Felix, who, again, Lucy has been fucking every summer that she's been invited to Bridget's family home. I think it's been like 4 or 5 years. Anyway, Bridget's being really weird and cagey, and she just wants to spend time with Lucy, so they kind of spend time together without Bridget ever saying why Lucy has had to put her business on hold and like drop everything to come and support her friend. Meanwhile, she's getting closer with Felix again, because of course she is. Of course she's going to continue fucking this guy that she's been fucking for 4 summers. And so the book kind of waffles between present day, which is irritating, and then also the flashbacks to Lucy and Felix fucking without ever having a single conversation, really. From this, we are supposed to gather and ascertain that Lucy and Felix are perfect for each other, that Bridget is really going through a hard time, and that we should forgive her for being so fucking annoying and not actually telling Lucy what's up. So when she tells Lucy what's up, you're like, that's really not that big of a deal, bitch. Like, you could have said that from the fucking beginning. It was annoying. It was annoying. Again, really, my primary issue with this book is that Lucy and Felix do not have a conversation, a true conversation about, like, feelings or their attraction for each other beyond just, let's just fuck immediately, until halfway through the book. And that is not enough time to build a relationship. And I understand that you can have this, like, palpable physical chemistry, for sure, for certain, but I really like banter. I really like knowing that these two are meant for each other, beyond just the fact that their parts fit together real good. It was really annoying. It was a really annoying book to read. I didn't like this. 2 stars. Okay. 2 back-to-back books that I didn't really like, books that I read for a list video. We've got The Tattooist of Auschwitz by Heather Morris. This book is about our main characters Lale and Gita, mostly just Lale. It's like narrated by him mostly. He is a tattooist. He is Jewish, and he has to tattoo his fellow Jewish citizens and friends, basically, who are coming to these camps, and you get to see the atrocities, obviously. He ends up falling in love while he's in the camp, and then after he gets out, he ends up finding her again, and they get to like live their love and whatever outside of the concentration camps. This was technically based on a true story, but the way that I feel about pretty much all historical fiction is that I would much rather read true accounts from that person or from a biographer than I would from a historical fiction writer, personally. Especially with World War II, I just feel like historical fiction romanticizes things in a way. I don't really like the romanticization of suffering and abuse. I just don't, that's not for me. Often too, we have women in historical fiction who are, again, abused, and we are supposed to be like, oh, well, I mean, yeah, obviously women were abused in the past, and like, she suffers so beautifully, and this is a story of hope and triumph because she ends up okay in the end, or like dying for her cause. That's less of a problem here because it's narrated by a man, but yeah, I'd rather just read a true account. And again, this might be based on a true story, but like an actual true account than read historical fiction, which is not even to mention the fact that this book in its telling is just very dry and very rote. There's not a lot of emotion behind it. It's like this happened, and then this happened, and then this happened. It just doesn't leave you a lot of time to linger in some of the horrible things that are happening and for them to really land as like emotionally impactful. Next up is When Breath Becomes Air, which is a book that is autobiographical about our author and his experiences in life, essentially. He was deciding in life basically whether he wanted to be a writer or go to medical school. He ends up going really far with his like writing. I think he might have a PhD in writing, I'm not entirely sure. He does eventually go to med school, and while he's in med school, or in his residency, he develops lung cancer. He is a neurosurgeon, I believe. So the book is really about his life, I guess, and how life can be fleeting. Obviously, it's a really heartbreaking story, heartbreaking to read because you know that obviously this person has passed away and I don't even think get to finish writing this book. It is incredibly short. I struggled with this one a bit as well. I've heard about this author, I've read his story, not like his actual story, his actual book, but I've read his story, and I've always been fascinated by stories like this, right? These stories of like irony and just sadness, right? Like this guy's training to become a doctor and ends up getting cancer. Like it's just so incredibly sad and horrible, obviously. Someone who's committed their life to doing good and ends up dying. But the story itself, I will admit, just was not my favorite. I think there were really good nuggets in here, especially learning a little bit about his upbringing. But I think what I really struggled with the story is just how it was told and how it was written. I wish, again, kind of similar to the last book, there had been more time to linger with certain emotions and certain moments, because this guy's life, like, it was big. Like he did big things and he had a rich life, and I think that I would have liked to linger more in certain parts of his life, like his upbringing, learning about his parents and his siblings, that kind of thing, rather than just saying like, oh, my parents were really good people who really made sure that I learned. Like I wanted more time to linger with certain things, and I think it would have made it a story that I connected with more. But I'm not here to really like judge and critique dying man's story about his own life, right? Like I guess in a sense I am, because I'm reviewing this book, but I don't rate nonfiction for this reason, because who am I to say how someone should tell their own story and their own personal struggles and their own tale, I guess. It can be to my liking or not to my liking how they end up putting that on the paper, but I'm not here to judge their story, I guess. This just wasn't my favorite, but a lot of respect obviously for this person, and I especially liked the chapters at the end written by his wife. Alright, let's speed run to romances, shall we? The Paradise Problem by Christina Lauren. It's a book about Anna and West. West needs to be married for 5 years so he can get his family's inheritance. Lucky for him, he has been married for 5 years to Anna because Anna needed student housing in college. Anna thinks they're divorced. West comes to tell her a couple of years after they move out from this house that they shared for a couple of years, again while she was in college, that they're not in fact divorced and that he needs her help. So can she come to this island? Can she pretend to be married to West so we can get this inheritance and deal with his shitty family? Who's gonna get in the way? Anna, of course, agrees because she likes money. Who doesn't like money? I liked the story. I thought it was pretty charming. It is a little more serious, I would say, than Christina Lauren's other books. Definitely more serious than something like The Unhoneymooners, but it still has the charm and the rom-comminess that you can expect from a Christina Lauren book. I found it to be incredibly hot and steamy as well, which I appreciated. I don't know. It was a good time. I think this is not like a super, super deep read, but it is fun. I think it would make for a good beach read. 4 stars. Savor It by Tara DeWitt. This is also a 5-star read for me. I felt so emotionally gut-punched when I read one of the pages because it connected so deeply with me about the things that I'm going through right now. I don't really want to get into that, but this book is about Sage and Fisher. Sage lives in this small town that she's lived in her whole life. She is a teacher and she kind of feels like she's just walking through life, but she wants to kind of like stick it to her ex and enter into this like town competition where you have to like row a canoe and like win a trivia contest and do all these things, and then you win or whatever. Fisher is coming to town because he's going to open a restaurant, and he is sort of also in a bad place. Like, sister died a few years ago, and this has really emotionally impacted him. He is now the guardian of his sister's child, so his niece, who is a teenager and is kind of going through a hard time herself. So he's going to come to this small town, try to recuperate, and try to get back to who he is, so he can get back to New York and cook where he actually likes to cook, and not in this piddly little small town. But he, of course, falls in love with Sage, decides he's going to help her with this competition, and she is going to help him with the menu for the restaurant that he is opening in the small town. The thing about Tara DeWitt books is that you can always expect a deeply romantic and deeply emotional story. They're not going to be super high stakes or high conflict, but they are going to be hot and fun. Sometimes I don't want to read a book that is just like overly complicated, where the conflicts are just these blowout fights or these things that like can't be unsaid. I like when characters kind of need time to work on themselves a little bit. Like maybe that's a third act conflict, you know? Things like that I think are really nice. And something that I feel is particularly underrated in romance is when authors are able to tell us why a character is the way that they are. I think a lot of people, when they're drafting a story in their head, they have these characters who have these feelings, but they don't know how to articulate why the characters are feeling this way and how they got to this place. And I think that Tara DeWitt and authors that are equally good at this do a really good job at telling us, okay, this person is a people pleaser. This is why they are this way. And Tara does a really good job at that, which I think is severely underrated, especially as you're trying to build a romance between two people. It's crucial. It's hard to pull off, and I think she does a good job at that. So 5 stars for this. Let's power through these next 5. Station 11, Emily St. John Mandel. I don't really want to talk about this, to be honest. I didn't like this, but I did at the same time. This is definitely the better book between this and whatever the fuck else I've read by this author that was very similar. This is a story about a pandemic and how it affects human nature and how we interact with each other and what the world would look like without really technology and without the things that we know, like air travel. Like if everybody dies, yeah, who's flying the fucking plane? It's an interconnected story. It follows a few different characters and how their stories kind of interweave with each other, both like on a human level and also on these people actually know each other kind of level. God, I'm doing a terrible job at describing this book. It was 2 stars. I mean, that's all we really need to know. It wasn't for me, but it wasn't a terrible book. A book that was actually pretty good, even though it wasn't, again, perfect for me. Next to You by Hannah Bonham Young. This is the only book by this author that I have not read. It's about Lane and Matt. Lane is feeling directionless in her life. Surprise, surprise. She decides that she is going to buy a school bus and renovate it. But guess what? She can't do this herself because she's a girl. And so she asks her friend Matt if he'll help. And he says yes, because he's very into her. And guess what? She's into him. And a lot of this book is her talking about how much she wants his D, even though they're friends, and she's not going to cross that line. The story progresses, they cross that line. They're basically in a relationship without calling it a relationship, until one day she's like, wait, this is too much, I need to not do this, and so they don't. And then they get back together later. I think I did a pretty good job at describing it. It just is kind of, it's not a very thrilling read, and sometimes I want that, sometimes I don't. I wasn't expecting like the biggest of conflicts, because Hannah Bonham Young does not tend to do that in her stories, but this book just felt like an inevitability, because it's not like our characters discovered their attraction along the way. It was like from the start of being friends, they've wanted to bone and they just haven't done that. And maybe that's more realistic, I guess you could say, but it just made for a story where I wasn't really like rooting for these two to get together. Like I kind of wanted to be with them while they discovered their feelings for each other. Does that make sense? 3 stars. All right. A double historical romance doozy for you. So I'm just going to talk about one of these and just tell you that this is the better of the two. Okay. My Season of Scandal by Julie Ann Long. This is a book that I picked up on the recommendation of Crystal from Crystal's Bookish Life. She always has the best historical romance recommendations, so if you want some, go check out her channel. This book is about Catherine and Dominic Kirk, okay? Catherine is the daughter of a country gentleman, and he's going to pass away soon. He's a doctor. Our heroine is very worldly because she's like seen a lot of things because her dad's a doctor, and he's like, hey babes, love you so much. I am gonna die soon. I'm a doctor, so I know these things. Can you go to town, mosey on around, do some cool dancing, and like find yourself a man? And she's like, you know what? I can do that for you, Dad. Like, I love you, respect you, and I don't want to be like, you know, destitute. So she goes to town. She is living in a boarding house called the Grand Palace on the Thames, and that is kind of the setting of all of these books. Basically, is this boarding house that's owned by a bunch of women and has like particular rules, all these things. Catherine's living in the boarding house, and so is Dominic. Dominic is a lord in the House of Commons, and he is trying to change things from within. He is known as a bit of a scoundrel. Even though Catherine and Dominic are attracted to each other and like have some interactions because they both live at the same place, they're not able to like actually be in a relationship, right? But Dominic kind of helps Catherine throughout her season to try to find a man. Not overtly, he's not like coaching her on how to flirt with people. He's doing things behind the scenes to kind of help her out. And one time he does like dance with her at one of these balls. And while they are at the boarding house, they have these conversations, and loved every second of this book. It was so charming because it did really a job at giving us strong characterization and really strong characters butting heads. These two are so well suited for each other and yet are so different, right? She is a little naive, but she's also optimistic. He is a little bit jaded, but he really appreciates her optimism. Like, she's definitely not someone who is not worldly. Like, she's seen things, but she hasn't experienced all that life has to offer. And I don't know, this combination of these two, it's just so perfect. I feel like it's rare that I read a romance where I'm like, I am desperate for these two to get together, like physically. This book is not smutty per se. There is a sex scene near the end of the book, and there is like a finger blasting scene that was quite delightful, kind of at the like 70% mark. And I think that's just a credit to how this author is able to write such palpable tension and chemistry between characters that I'm like dying for them to rip each other's clothes off. It's giving Bridgerton, is what it's giving. And yet I like these immensely more than any Bridgerton book that I've personally ever read. That's not even to mention the third act kind of conflict and the delightful love declaration that this hero does for our heroine. I think you're missing out if you don't read this. I'm gonna be honest. I think of all of these books, I think you really need to read Just for the Summer, obviously by Abby Jimenez, and then My Season of Scandal. Like, it was just so fucking good. I wish I could say the same for How to Tame a Wild Rogue, which is the book that comes before this one. Unfortunately, I just feel like it was a very similar story with less development, so I don't necessarily love that one as much. I gave that one 3 stars, but I really want to check out more by this author in the future. Then the last book. Okay, strap in because I'm gonna bitch for a second about Little Fires Everywhere by Celeste Ng. I hated this a lot. I am an infertile lass myself. Okay, if we're getting technical, I'm not infertile, I'm dealing with infertility. I didn't really want to read a book about it. I'm gonna be 100% real with you, and I wish it had been included at some point anywhere in the description of this book. This also was published in 2017, so if you haven't read it and you don't want to be spoiled, get out of here. I'm gonna talk about it. This book is about Mia and Pearl. Mia is a single mother, Pearl is her daughter. They come to this town after having like traveled around a bunch. Mia's like, you know what, we're gonna stay put so Pearl can go to this really good high school in this really good town in Cleveland, and she's gonna make friends with all these little Richie Riches, and she's gonna get into a good college, okay? Renting from the Richardson family. Pearl ends up becoming really enmeshed with, I guess you could say. The Richardsons are run by this matriarch, who's kind of the worst. She has 4 children. Isabel, who's kind of like a rebel. Lexi, who gets an abortion throughout the story. Not a bad thing, just a thing that happens. We've got Trip, who Pearl ends up sleeping with, and then we've got Moody, who likes Pearl and is upset at the end of the book that Pearl sleeps with his brother. Here's the thing. I don't know what the fucking point of this book was. I don't understand what the point of this book was. I think it's supposed to paint Mia and Pearl as like good characters and the other characters in this book as bad characters, because essentially what happens is Pearl's just living her life doing girly things. The other kids are doing, you know, kid things. Conflicts happen kind of between the kids. That kind of thing happens. But really the core of the story, I guess, is about motherhood and about choice. Maybe, I guess we could call it that. I don't even know that we're really getting really good decisions there. There is a Chinese American woman who I guess Mia somehow knows, who ends up leaving her child at a fire station because she's in a really bad situation. Months later, she wants her child back, and her child has been, I guess, fostered by this family in this rich area in Cleveland. The person who is like fostering this child and wants to adopt her considers the child her own, has been through multiple miscarriages, has had fertility struggles, and so I think we're supposed to sympathize with her desire to adopt this child. We're also, of course, given the perspective of the Chinese American woman who is trying to get her child back, gotten the help she needs, and, you know, wants to be a parent. And the real conflict comes in here because the Richardson mom really believes that the Cleveland Richie Rich woman should keep this baby that's not hers, and Mia thinks that the Chinese American woman should keep her baby, or should get her baby back, I suppose. And the reason that Mia feels this way is because Mia was going to agree to be a surrogate for someone with her own egg and the sperm of the husband of the person who's like infertile, whatever. She runs away with that baby and doesn't give the baby to who she promised to be a surrogate for anyway. So that's why she's been on the run the whole time, is what you find out. And that's the reason that she feels so strongly that this woman should have her baby back. It kind of puts these two women, Mia and the Richardson mom, at odds. And then the kids obviously are at play because the Richardson mom, I guess, like finds out that what she thinks is Pearl getting an abortion, but actually technically it was her daughter that got the abortion. I don't know, y'all, it's just messy. It's just mess is what it is. I don't understand what this book was trying to say, to be honest. I feel like it's pretty black and white, all of these situations, right? Chinese American woman should have her baby. It's her fucking baby. Sorry that you're infertile. Like, adoption's not a solution for your infertility. Mia, I guess her situation's a little bit complicated. At the end of the day, that is her child, so she should be able to keep her child and like shouldn't be on the run, although she could have just been honest with her daughter, so like she's also kind of a piece of shit. I don't know what the point of this book was. Someone tell me. Someone please tell me in the comments. Can you tell me what the point of this book was? Because I just don't see it. I'm not gonna talk about it anymore. 2 stars. I hated this. What is the point of this book? Not to kill the vibe, because I feel like that last book was a bit of a vibe killer. I read a lot of books, and I'm proud of that, and I hope you didn't hate my speed run, because I definitely talked way too fast in this video. And to anybody that comments, is this video sped up. It's not. That's just how I talk. And you can slow it down in the little gear button at the bottom. Thanks for watching. It was a good month. There's a lot of fun stuff coming in June. Love you all so much, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!